There are two great mysteries which have captivated the human imagination for thousands of years. The first of these is why the universe exists at all. Why is there something rather than nothing? In many ways, this is a primordial question and has been raised by thinkers of every culture. And yet this ultimate mystery of existence is all but eclipsed by another mystery, that conscious minds exist to perceive it and bear conscious witness to the universe. While it is present to every waking moment of our lives, nothing is more mysterious than the fact that reality allows for conscious experience. Consciousness is the gateway of all value, meaning, and significance in the universe, and yet no scientific consensus has ever been reached about how and why we have it. An ancient idea is that the mystery of consciousness and the mystery of existence are intimately connected. And perhaps surprisingly, there are now growing numbers of philosophers and scientists who take this possibility very seriously. It is this possible connection between these two great mysteries that we will explore today. The mystery of existence. Over the last century, cosmologists have learnt a great deal about the early universe. By analysing cosmic background radiation, cosmologists peer deeply into the past, inferring the state of the universe in what is thought to be its first fractions of a second. But where did it all come from? What caused the universe? What happened before the Big Bang? The physicist Stephen Hawking cautions that this is the wrong question. The beginning of the universe was itself the beginning of time. To ask what came before time is meaningless, like asking what is north of the North Pole. And yet, for many, this answer fails to satisfy. Why did the universe burst forth into existence? And what shaped it to be the way that it is? Physicists have proposed that the spark of existence had its origin in a quantum fluctuation, triggering an explosive chain reaction, leading to the still evolving universe we inhabit today. This narrative of existence, however, presupposes the laws of quantum mechanics. It leaves entirely unexplained why the primordial situation should be constrained by quantum physics. It is here that we encounter the central problem which haunts the mystery of existence. Every time we propose the existence of a new initial state or cause, another one is required to explain that. Instead of explaining existence, we find ourselves simply adding more to that which needs to be explained. The same presumably goes for consciousness. To those who claim consciousness to be fundamental to reality, there is the challenge of explaining how consciousness might avoid the same problem of infinite regress. Why placing it at the foundations of nature doesn't simply add yet more to that which needs to be explained. In recent times, the possibility that consciousness is fundamental to reality has re-entered the academic conversation and gained new respect from philosophers and scientists alike. There are a number of reasons for this, but to summarize very briefly, in recent decades it has grown ever more conspicuous that the materialist understanding of science seems entirely unequipped to explain how and why consciousness exists. That our consciousness, the most undeniable fact of reality, could so entirely evade our scientific paradigm has been taken by some as a conspicuous sign that materialism, while fantastically useful, is not an exhaustive account of nature, and that what we have called consciousness may in fact represent a deeper part of reality than previously imagined. at least by most modern scientists.
If you can't explain consciousness in terms of the existing fundamentals, space, time, mass, charge, then as a matter of logic, you need to expand the list. The natural thing to do is to postulate consciousness itself as something fundamental, a fundamental building block of nature.
Part of the motivation for this view comes from the fact that standard science provides only an external and behavioral account of reality. Its intrinsic nature, what reality is in itself, is unprovided by physics. Furthermore, the immanent reality of consciousness is the only intrinsic nature we know of, and in several respects, it seems to be an attractive candidate for also being the intrinsic interior nature of reality itself. But if consciousness is in some way fundamental to reality, how might this shed light on the mystery of existence? This question was explored by philosophers in the late 18th and early 19th century, when a movement known as German idealism rose to prominence in Europe. As the movement progressed, a core circle of thinkers argued for the absolute primacy of consciousness. Among other notable thinkers, philosophers Johann Fichte, Friedrich Schelling, and Georg Hegel urged that a deeper understanding of consciousness is necessary to understand why anything exists at all. It was Friedrich Schelling who first drew a direct parallel with the absolute ground of existence and the essential structure of consciousness. Existence, Schelling theorized, must be self-grounding. What this means, essentially, is that the primordial basis of reality must somehow be the cause of its own existence. To avoid the problem of infinite regress, an ultimate ground must be supposed, of which self-existence is part of its intrinsic nature. So what does this have to do with consciousness? The philosopher and mentor of Schelling, Johann Fichte, had previously argued that a unique feature of consciousness is that it does not appear grounded in anything beyond itself. The conscious self is self-producing, insofar that it exists only in and to itself. As the contemporary philosopher Douglas Hofstadter has put it, quote, "It is almost as if this slippery phenomenon called self-consciousness lifted itself up by its own bootstraps, almost as if it made itself out of nothing." End quote. In a similar way, the philosopher Peter Sass described self-consciousness as like a, quote, "magical matryoshka, a Russian nesting doll which also magically contains itself." It was precisely this quality that Schelling realized must be an attribute of the ultimate ground of existence. Furthermore, this was a quality that could be found nowhere else but in consciousness. Today, centuries later, the philosopher Freya Matthews defends a position very similar to Schelling. Matthews has pointed out that the self-causing principle behind existence must be reflexive, and yet this property of aboutness, known to philosophers as intentionality, is another property found nowhere else but in consciousness. Something from nothing. Could anything ever really come from nothing? Perhaps the concept of a true nothing is simply an idea, represented nowhere in reality. Perhaps instead of beginning with nothing, the challenge of explaining existence should instead focus on defining a self-existing ground, at which explanation can finally end. As we've already seen, physicists have proposed that the true ground floor of reality is the seething quantum realm of particles foaming in and out of existence. While this level of reality surely exists, There is no clear reason why the primordial situation should be constrained by quantum physics. A deeper level of explanation seems to be required. One possibility is that consciousness is the absolute ground of existence. And while this would add yet another level of existence, as we have seen, it offers the benefit of actually posing an explanation for its self-grounding self-existence. How quantum physics came to be the ground of reality calls out for explanation, whereas consciousness, in theory, can explain itself. If this is the case, we might wonder how such a necessary self-grounding consciousness could give rise to quantum physics and everything else. How could something as intangible as consciousness ground and connect with the laws of physics? Respected physicists have long defended, albeit controversially, that a connection point does exist between consciousness and quantum physics, notably in relation to observation. It seems that in all quantum experiments, the state of a system is always defined by the information that can be made available to observers. In quantum experiments, the choice to observe has the effect of defining the state of the system, which would otherwise present itself in a superposition of all possible states, and in which producing very different experimental outcomes. While the interpretation of this very strange finding is hotly debated, leading physicists, both past and present, have pointed to consciousness as playing a central role in quantum measurement. Is it possible that the universe exists through self-observation? Is the universe, as the physicist John Wheeler once called it, a self-excited circuit, in which consciousness gives meaning and thus reality to the world? In the past, arguments that consciousness is fundamental to reality have been dismissed because in the physical world there is simply no room for consciousness to play a role. No consciousness forces or mental particles have ever been discovered. A role for consciousness in quantum measurement, Chalmers points out, finally provides this fundamental property of consciousness with a fundamental role to play. It is worth keeping in mind that it remains a complete mystery what physical laws are actually describing. The intrinsic nature of the world, what reality is in itself, is entirely unexplained by physics. Existence from value. Another possible connection between consciousness and the mystery of existence lies in the relationship of consciousness with value. Philip Goff is among the recent wave of philosophers defending the fundamentality of consciousness. Goff has also suggested that the animating force of reality may be mysteriously connected to its value. Goff reminds us of an insight first made by the philosopher David Hume in the 19th century. Hume observed that we simply do not perceive causes in nature. While we perceive a flow of events, our apparent perception of causes is an illusion. Similarly, science does not actually reveal causes in the world. Goff points out that once we truly recognize this, we are free to consider an alternative possibility, that natural necessity, the animating force of existence, is not material or mechanical, but in fact follows from its value. Goff considers that such a view might also help to explain why, against all of the odds, the universe seems finely tuned to allow for what he calls, quote, a universe of great value, in which conscious, value-sensitive beings can evolve. In the last century, cosmologists have learnt that slightly changing any number of precise values in the laws of physics has the immediate effect of obliterating all possibility of life. Among all of the intelligible arrangements of nature's laws, the probability of a life-friendly universe is, in fact, trillions to one. This provocative discovery has led to the proposal by some of a multiverse, trillions of other universes, the existence of which can nullify the apparent specialness of the universe. But as Goff and others have argued, fine-tuning may actually be an indicator of the deeper significance and necessity of consciousness on the metaphysical landscape. The philosopher John Leslie explored this possibility in his 1979 book, Value and Existence, where he argued that because of the problem of infinite regress, no physical mechanism will ever be adequate to explain the universe's existence. To solve this mystery, we must go beyond materialism and consider that something very different, more akin to value, is the animating force of reality. If so, a universe capable of supporting value-sensitive, conscious minds might have been a metaphysical necessity. Is it possible, as the 20th century philosopher Alfred North Whitehead believed, that, quote, existence itself is the upholding of value intensity, end quote? The view that value is the animating force of existence is a perspective with deep philosophical roots both in Western and Eastern systems of thought. Plato, in particular, believed that the animating first cause of existence was its goodness. For Plato, existence itself held intrinsic value over non-existence, and that this latent value was the generative force of reality. While the human understanding of the universe has progressed a long way since the time of Plato, there are nonetheless philosophers today who argue that Plato was essentially correct, that the underlying nature of the universe is more mind-like than classically physical, and the true creative force of this reality is its value. Consciousness is the vehicle of all value, meaning, and significance in the universe. To put it bluntly, without consciousness, nothing matters. But is it also possible, as we have explored today, that without consciousness, nothing would exist?